So after a week of seemingly endless votes, we finally reached the last stage of the Conservative leadership election. Throughout the race so far, there have been allegations of tactical voting, and these seem to have really come to a head in the last couple of rounds. So as we have in recent days, we'll run through what happened in the 4th and 5th round of voting, and then explain why people think this is evidence of some tactical voting going on. Quickly though, and I know you're sick of us encouraging you to back us on Patreon, there's a link in the description, so I thought instead I'd say that you should follow us across our other social networks. We share content on there including updating you when each of the candidates got knocked out of the leadership race, links to articles, and some really interesting polling data. To find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, simply search for TLDR News. Before we jump into the allegations of tactical voting, let's very quickly go through a bit of background on the leadership race. I promise this will be as fast as we can because I know we've done this lots before. A couple of weeks ago, Theresa May stepped down as the leader of the Conservative Party. So the Conservative members of Parliament spent the last week or so whittling down the candidates through a series of votes, which we've just reached the end of. This process continued until there were only 2 left, at which point the around 160,000 paying members of the Conservative Party vote to decide who their new leader will be. Because the Conservatives are currently in government, whoever is chosen will automatically become the UK's Prime Minister, meaning the general electorate and the UK as a whole don't get to pick their next Prime Minister. So let's run through the rounds quickly and look at some of the potential irregularities. The first round, 3 people were eliminated and 1 stepped down shortly after voting. Nothing weird so far. In the second round, hard Brexiteer Dominic Raab was eliminated. Again, nothing wholly suspicious when you look at his scoring in the first and second round. But one thing does seem odd. Look at the jump in Stewart's support. Now it's possible that in the time between the first and second rounds of votes, Stewart suddenly appealed to a whole lot more MPs. But there's another theory too. Some speculate that the Boris Johnson camp encouraged supporters to back Stewart in an attempt to bump up his score and in turn push Raab into last place, eliminating him from the race. This would make sense considering that Raab has traditionally had a similar stance on Brexit to Johnson, so Johnson might have wanted a tough competitor out of the race. This is especially useful to Johnson, as kicking Raab out at this stage meant that he never made it to the live TV debate that night, so Raab never got the chance to challenge Johnson's Brexiteer credentials in front of the nation. Not fully convinced yet? Wondering why TLDR News has suddenly turned into TLDR Conspiracy? Well, when you look at the next round of voting, the story falls into place even further. Suddenly Stewart's support falls off, and he's knocked out of the race. Maybe it's because of his performance in the debate, which even he admitted was lacklustre, but many speculate it's because the Johnson supporters suddenly returned back to Johnson. It's worth noting here that Boris Johnson's score took a big boost at this stage. So this brings us to Thursday morning, the 4th round of voting. And with those 4 candidates left in the race, the scores were as follows. Boris 157, Gove 61, Hunt 59, Javid 34. That means that Sajid Javid is out of the race at this point. Again, not surprising considering his vote tallies throughout the race. One thing that's worth noting though is that Johnson takes a big boost in this stage. It's unlikely that many of Stewart's former backers would move to supporting Johnson, as they have very different ideologies. But this shift would make sense if Johnson had indeed lent support to Stewart. Maybe this is all of his supporters returning home to the Johnson camp. So now we've nearly reached the final stage. With 3 candidates left, the Conservative MPs have 1 more vote to decide who the wider party membership picks between. Everyone knows that Boris is going to get through. His results have been incredibly strong throughout, so failure at this point is very unlikely. So with Johnson essentially safe, the vote is really a choice between Gove and Hunt. Now this is where we put our conspiratorial hat on again. Johnson would rather face Hunt in the final than Gove. Many believe that Gove has a much better shot of beating Johnson than Hunt does. So Johnson would naturally rather have the easier fight against Hunt in the final. Gove has also been slightly more critical of Johnson throughout the process, suggesting that Gove might not be afraid of a bit of blue on blue infighting in order to get the role. This is something that many people want to avoid. The Conservatives are fractured enough, they don't need another wedge to be shoved between them. So, TLDR, Johnson would rather fight off with Hunt in the final 2 than with Gove. And that's not even going back to the story of revenge you could start to draw up. Because remember back in the 2016 leadership election, But Gove and Johnson had formed somewhat of a pact that they'd work together and Gove would support Johnson's leadership bid. But then Gove decided to essentially stab Johnson in the back, emotive language I know, and decide to run his own separate campaign, essentially torpedoing Johnson's plans and his chance of becoming Prime Minister. So a lot of news outlets are now speculating that Johnson wanted to get his revenge and push Gove out of the race at this point. Anyway, theories aside, let's look at what happened in the 5th round of voting. The results were as follows. Johnson 160, Hunt 77, Gove 75. So that obviously means that Gove was knocked out, leaving Johnson and Hunt in the final 2, exactly what Johnson wanted. Now, do we know for sure that Johnson's team orchestrated this? Well, no. But when you look at the changes in the total votes, Johnson only picked up a suspiciously small number of supporters in this 5th round. It certainly looks like there should have been a bigger bump here. And a reasonable explanation for this not happening is that some of his supporters left his camp to try and get Hunt into the final 2. Taking this action makes even more sense when you look back to round 4. In this round, you'll notice that Gove beat out Hunt to get 2nd place for the first time in the entire race. Therefore, if Johnson really wanted Hunt in the final, his camp might consider special action to make sure that happens. Now, if you think this all sounds a bit far-fetched and you're not convinced by the volume of rumours, we do know that this kind of thing does happen. In fact, we know that Johnson supporters received texts from Gove's team trying to get them to support their candidate, arguing that Hunt wasn't a true Brexiteer, and that there needed to be 2 Brexiteers in the final stage. This argument clearly didn't work, but it does really illustrate how much tactical voting can be used by the candidates. One MP talking to the Daily Telegraph commented that it's clear that some of Boris's votes were lent to Jeremy Hunt, and I think they have done it with the proxy votes all the way through. The MPs who voted for Jeremy will never know, because they weren't there and their proxy switched their vote without telling them. But as far as Michael Gove is concerned, there's an old saying that if you live by the sword, you die by the sword, or in his case, the knife. Now, does this matter? Is there a rule against it, and is it wrong? Well, I guess 2 of those questions are kind of up to you. There's certainly not rules against it. Johnson had such a big lead from the beginning, he could always afford to lose some votes in order to get the right people knocked out of the race at the right time. It's up to you if you think playing this kind of game matters, or if it's wrong. But for my 2 cents, I think it's probably okay. Sure, it's a slightly shady and cynical way of playing the game, but it clearly was a tactic employed by a number of candidates. And it's sort of what this kind of system of election encourages people to do. What do you think though? Let us know in the comments. Do you think that Johnson's team actually tried to manipulate the vote? And if they did, do you think it was the wrong thing to do? We're interested what you think on this issue. So now we've reached the final stage of the leadership race. 313 Conservative MPs have now whittled down the pack to a final 2, Johnson and Hunt. Now is the time of the 160,000 paying members of the Conservative Party to have their say. Over the next month, these 2 will campaign for their support, and members will begin to send postal ballots. So by the end of July, we should know exactly who the new Prime Minister will be. Of course, we'll keep you updated on the race as it continues, as well as sharing the ultimate result as soon as we have it. So make sure to subscribe to our channel. We're also working on a video where we compare the final 2 candidates, so keep an eye out for that in the coming days. Also, like I said at the beginning, you can find us across Facebook, Twitter and Instagram simply by searching for TLDR News. I know I briefly joked about Patreon at the beginning, but let me just remind you that you just have 7 days left to sign up to our Patreon page in order to get a free TLDR News enamel pin. Obviously these images are just examples because it would be a bit weird for a news channel to use these designs, so instead we're making 10 versions of our Country with Shoes design. We selected the countries based on the 10 countries where we have the most subscribers at the moment, and if you're signed up before the end of June, you'll get one of them sent right to you. To support independent news, claim your free enamel pin badge, and get all of the normal perks, head over to our Patreon page. There's a link in the description.